You can spend a lifetime filming wild animals and still witness something that knocks the breath right out of you. That's exactly what happened to Jake Reynolds, a seasoned wildlife filmmaker whose only job that day was to observe from a distance. But when a tiny bobcat cub, barely 4 months old, was swept away by the raging Cascade River, instinct took over. Jake didn't hesitate. He threw down his camera and dove headfirst into a torrent of ice-cold chaos. The current was merciless. Debris rushed past like battering rams, and every second felt like a losing battle. But there, clinging to life, was that small, trembling animal. Jake fought his way through the frigid swirl, refusing to let the cub slip beneath the surface. And somehow, by sheer force of will, he reached the shore, soaked, bruised, and gasping, with the cub clinging to his shoulders like a child. What came next didn't just defy expectations, it defied nature as we know it. Jake could barely feel his legs as he climbed the slippery riverbank, water pouring from his clothes in heavy streams. The bobcat cub, soaked and shivering, was latched onto his shoulder like a second skin, its tiny claws clutching at his jacket. Every muscle in Jake's body screamed in protest, but his eyes were locked on the small life he had just pulled from the clutches of a merciless river. Then he froze. A hush had fallen over the forest. Just ahead, no more than 20 feet away, stood 6 fully grown bobcats, silent, unmoving, and unmistakably alert. Their golden eyes fixed on him, their bodies low and poised, tails flicking with unreadable intent. Jake's instincts screamed, "Don't run." Not that he could have, even if he wanted to. His legs were jelly. His heart thudded in his chest like a warning drum. At the center stood a massive female, clearly the alpha. Her stance was dominant, yet strangely calm. She didn't hiss, didn't bare her teeth. Instead, she stepped forward, one slow, deliberate pace at a time. Jake braced himself. His breathing shallowed. This is how wildlife filmmakers die, he thought, only half joking. Not by bear, not by wolf, but by a bobcat welcoming committee I didn't RSVP for. But then, something astonishing happened. The alpha stopped just a foot away. Her eyes flicked to the cub still draped on Jake's shoulder, then to Jake himself. And without warning, she lowered her head. Slowly, reverently. She leaned in and touched her rough, sandpaper-like tongue to Jake's cheek. Once, twice, a third time. She was grooming him. Jake blinked, stunned. Was this real? He glanced around. The others remained still, but the tension had lifted, replaced by a kind of curious calm. The big male even let out a slow, steady chuff like a puff of approval. This wasn't aggression. This was acknowledgement. Jake had spent years in the wild, filming some of the most elusive animals on Earth. But nothing, not documentaries, not survival training, not a lifetime of animal encounters, could have prepared him for the bizarre honor of being accepted, even temporarily, into a bobcat pack. The cub finally slipped off his shoulder and stumbled toward the alpha. She sniffed the little one thoroughly, then turned back to Jake with what could only be described as an animal version of a nod, as if to say, "You did well." Jake dared not move. Every second felt like a delicate negotiation, one wrong gesture away from chaos. But the alpha didn't want chaos. She wanted peace. He stayed like that for a while, kneeling in wet clothes, blinking through the surreal fog of it all, letting this wild moment unfold around him like something out of a dream. Not a single animal made a threatening move. They just watched, studied him, then slowly began to reposition themselves, forming something that looked a lot like order. Jake had no idea what they'd do next. He didn't even know if he was allowed to stand. But something in their calm, their stillness, whispered that this story was far from over, and that his part in it, whatever it was, had just begun. For the next few hours, Jake didn't move far from that riverbank. He sat cross-legged in the damp moss, jacket steaming slightly under the sun as it finally broke through the trees. The pack stayed nearby, close enough to watch him, far enough to remind him this wasn't his space. He was a guest, a strange, two-legged visitor whose presence had been tolerated for reasons that defied logic. The cub, though, had made up its mind. It nestled beside Jake like they'd known each other forever, its small body curled tight against his thigh. Occasionally it'd blink up at him with sleepy eyes, and he'd swear there was trust there. Not the cautious kind, but the raw, instinctive trust only a wild animal could offer. No conditions, no agenda, just quiet belief. Jake gently brushed mud from the cub's fur. "What are you doing, little one?" he murmured. "You belong with them, not with me." But even as he said it, the cub pressed closer. The alpha watched from a patch of ferns, her golden gaze steady. Every now and then she'd rise, stretch, and circle Jake in wide, deliberate arcs. Not hostile, not even curious anymore. Protective, almost. Like she had decided, this strange creature is under my watch now. Jake had seen animals behave in remarkable ways before. Rescues, unlikely friendships, even grief. But this wasn't the kind of moment you caught on camera and narrated later with polished voiceover. This was deeper, personal, a quiet rewriting of boundaries that no textbook could explain. And it wasn't just the cub. One of the younger bobcats, lean and lanky, crept forward sometime after noon. He padded slowly, ears twitching, eyes on Jake's hands. When Jake reached out, fingers flat, non-threatening, the young male sniffed his palm. Then, to Jake's shock, sat like a house cat asking for company. Jake let out a low laugh, the first in hours. "You guys do realize I'm not one of you, right?" No answer, of course, just the rustling of wind through leaves. And yet, there was something profoundly known in their presence. Not just recognition, but a kind of ancient knowing that bypassed words, as if they understood that Jake wasn't just there for a rescue. He was part of a larger story, one that none of them fully grasped yet. He reached into his backpack, soaked but salvageable, and pulled out a protein bar. He broke a corner off and placed it on the ground. The cub sniffed it, but ignored it in favor of Jake's shoelace, which it began gnawing on like a toddler with a teething ring. Jake chuckled softly. "Right. Gourmet forest cuisine not up to your standards." It was absurd, ridiculous, wonderful. By late afternoon, the pack had eased into what could only be called a truce. Jake wasn't family, but he wasn't a threat. He was something else. A bridge, maybe, or a witness. He didn't know how long this odd window of acceptance would last. Wild animals don't sign contracts. But for now, he was living, inside a kind of miracle. One stitched together with silence, instincts, and the quiet grace of mutual respect. And deep down, Jake knew. This wasn't just about a bobcat cub. It never had been. This was about connection, about being seen and accepted by a world that usually keeps its distance. And it was only the beginning. Night came like a whisper. The forest shifted, softened. Light drained from the sky in slow ripples, and a hush settled over the earth, thick as velvet. Jake knew he couldn't stay much longer. His radio battery was dead. His supplies were dwindling, and the team back at base would be worrying if they weren't already combing the park with flashlights and clipped voices. Still, his feet wouldn't move. The cub lay asleep in his lap now, its breath slow and warm against his jacket. The other bobcats had formed a loose crescent in the brush, half alert, half at ease. It felt like a kind of vigil, like they were waiting for something neither Jake nor they could name. He looked up at the sky. Stars were coming out one by one, cold and clear and ancient. Jake whispered, more to himself than anyone. What happens now? There was no plan for this. No chapter in the ranger manual that covered what to do when a wild animal chooses you. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was something else. A bond formed beyond species, beyond understanding. A quiet, mutual letting in. He gently shifted the cub off his lap and stood. The cub blinked up at him, confused. Then it let out a soft mew, barely audible. Jake knelt beside it. "You've got a story to live," he said, voice catching. "A real one, out here, with them, not with me." But the cub didn't move. It just pressed its head into his boot, stubborn and still so very small. That's when the alpha approached. She didn't growl, didn't bristle. She came with the deliberate calm of something wild and certain. Her golden eyes met Jake's, and something passed between them, something raw and deeply real. She stepped beside the cub and nudged it gently. Once, twice. The cub hesitated, then turned, walked to her. Jake's breath left his body like it had been knocked out of him. Not because he was sad, but because he wasn't. Not really. This was right. This was what every good rescue was meant to lead to. Not ownership, not dependency, but return. Return to what was never ours to begin with. The pack melted into the trees soon after. No grand exit, no backward glance, just soft pads over pine needles and silence. Jake stood there a long time, alone again, and yet not. Because something had changed. Not out there, in the woods, but in him. He turned toward the direction of base camp, legs stiff, body aching. As he walked, he replayed every second, every twitch of fur, every breath, every unexpected moment of trust. This wasn't a tale he'd tell at ranger briefings or put in a wildlife report. This was a story you carried differently, one that stitched itself into your bones. And somewhere he knew the cub would grow. It would run through moonlit fields and sunlit glades. It would learn the weight of wind and the taste of freedom. Maybe it would remember him, maybe not. But Jake would never forget. Because sometimes the wild doesn't just take you in, it teaches you how to let go. And that's the most sacred rescue of all. A week had passed. Jake stood once again on the edge of that same forest, boots sinking slightly into the softened ground, backpack heavier with silence than supplies. The trees hadn't changed, but something in him had. He felt it in the way he moved, the way he listened. Not just to the forest, but with it. He wasn't there for duty this time. No rescue, no call, no report to file. Just memory. He stepped into the pinewood hush, following no trail, letting instinct guide him. Not the kind trained in classrooms, but the one awakened by experience, by emotion, by something ancient and wordless. As he walked, wind played through the needles above him, creating a music only the forest could write. Somewhere, a raven called. Somewhere else, the echo of a paw print that would never show on human maps. Jake reached the clearing. It looked different in daylight. Less magical, maybe, but no less sacred. He knelt beside the moss-covered log where the cub had once slept, ran his fingers across its bark like reading a forgotten language. No bobcats greeted him this time. The forest gave no signs. And yet, he felt them. In the hush between branches, in the space, between heartbeats. They were gone, but they weren't. Jake pulled a small notebook from his jacket. He hadn't planned on writing anything, but the pages opened themselves. The words poured out. Not just a story, but their story. Not one of ownership or dominance, but of reciprocity, of trust shared under impossible stars. He wrote about the cub's eyes, the quiet decision of the alpha, the moment the wild chose not to fear. And he wrote about the leaving, because every true rescue ends not with possession, but with a return, a release, a reverence. Hours passed unnoticed. As the sun dipped, a soft rustle came from the tree line. Jake didn't turn. He didn't need to. He just knew. A single shape stood watching from a distance, half shadow, half memory. The cub. Older now, or maybe just braver. It didn't approach, just watched. Eyes wide, calm. A shared recognition passed between them. Something quieter than words, deeper than logic. Jake didn't move. He only smiled. After a moment, the cub turned, disappeared into the green. And this time, Jake didn't feel the ache of goodbye. He felt the echo of something fuller, a cycle, a knowing, a trust that outlives presence. When he returned to base that night, his colleagues asked no questions. They had seen something change in him, a stillness that wasn't emptiness, a peace that wasn't detachment. They said nothing, and that was enough. That story, it wouldn't go viral. It wouldn't make headlines. It wouldn't even make it into the Park's weekly update. But it would live. In the way Jake now taught new rangers, in the way he approached every animal with less urgency, more reverence, in the way he paused before every rescue, asking not, "How can I fix this?" but "What does this creature need to be free again?" Because once you've been chosen by the wild, even for a moment, you are never quite the same. And long after the animal is gone, the rescue remains, not in the woods, but in you. Sometimes, it's not the strongest roar or the sharpest claw that leaves the deepest mark. It's a quiet glance, a small heartbeat, a young bobcat who didn't run. So now, I ask you, have you ever felt that an animal saw something in you before you even saw it yourself? What would you have done standing in that forest with those wild eyes staring into yours? And more than that, do you believe some animals choose us, not the other way around? Let me know in the comments. Your story matters here. If this touched something in your heart, then you might want to watch our story about the baby moose that wouldn't leave the ranger's side, or the old grizzly that came back every spring just to sit near the same tree. And if these stories speak to your soul, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications. We share real moments from the wild and the spirit every single week, because sometimes what we're looking for is out there, looking back.